Pardon the interruption. I'm Chris Gehrz. Sam, July 7th is National Macaroni Day. Now, I know you don't like cold macaroni salad, but just for this day, would you eat cold macaroni salad?
I'll give it a try.
I think you're supposed to cook those.
Welcome to PTI, boys and girls. I'm Sam Mulberry. Chris, the first exam is close upon us, but before we get to that, I want to think about our discussion post from last time, right? Which was on sort of just and unjust laws.
Yeah, and I think we should acknowledge here, because of our travel plans over the 4th of July weekend, we're actually recording this 8 days ahead of time. So students,
It's June 29.
you just started writing this discussion board post, so we'll enjoy them, to be sure. We'll have a nice conversation. We haven't actually read any of them yet. So I think the way we'll approach this is, had we been students responding to this, which of the readings would we have responded to? Especially, I'm going to do something a little different and say I probably would have written about Thucydides, which tends to be the one in our experience students pay the least attention to because it's really the least comfortable response. And here I'm thinking not about the Pericles speech that Athens is a school for all of Greece, but the second, the Melian dialogue, where you get the Athenian ambassadors behaving in a very seemingly anti-democratic way, saying basically might makes right, that justice is something that equals contend, but where there's a vast disparity in power, the weak suffer what they must. And I don't like that. That's not a satisfying thing. That's not especially a Christian way to think about it, for sure. It's not a very moral way, but yeah, that's true.
It looks like the world, right?
That's the world,
right?
As someone who does diplomatic and international and political history, that sure describes the world a whole lot more than Antigone or Martin Luther King Jr. Not the world as it should be, but the world as it is. That seems right more often than not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm drawn to Crito as a sort of picture of justice, which also sort of fits within some of the area that we're maybe as Christians there's less of an ideal area, or at least there's this sort of sense of embracing the fact that there are secular powers, or there are powers beyond worldly powers that are sort of beyond our control, and maybe our job isn't just to rebel against them, but it's to create a witness, right? I think about Socrates sitting in jail, right, sitting on death row, awaiting his end, and let's say he had chosen to follow Crito and to escape. We might not know about Socrates now, right? Like his powerful witness isn't saying, no, I think that I'm right. In fact, I know that I'm right, but I accept sort of the punishment for what I've done, in part because this is going to speak more deeply about what I believe. This is at the core of what I believe. When we think about, Christian martyrdom going forward, right? That's the same thing. I think about Christian martyrs in the first 3 centuries, right? That's part of it is they're not arguing against the government saying the government needs to change. They're saying this is what the world is like. In the same kind of what you're saying about Thucydides, right? Like I have a feeling that if Socrates had read Thucydides, or if Polycarp had read Thucydides, they would say, yep,
yeah, exactly.
That's exactly it, right?
This is why it's
and I think, the reason I think I'm drawn to that and you're drawn to these types of things is because I think as Christians living in America, we're pretty comfortable, right? And we tend to not want to embrace the fact that for a lot of Christian history, suffering is at its core, right? And I think that's something. I'm not saying what I really want to do is suffer because I like being comfortable, but maybe it's what I should embrace more, right? And there's suffering in the world. I just don't always feel it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other thing that the Crito points to is that we don't use words like duty and obligation a whole lot. I teach a human rights and international history class once in a while, and this is something I try to wrestle with is we as 21st century Americans are pretty comfortable with the notion that we have God-given rights that are universal and natural, and we're very defensive about them. Like, how dare you take away my rights, which is fine. But I also point out, especially once you get to Asia and Africa, and we read from everyone from Gandhi to African political theologians, say that that's fine, except that has to be accompanied by some sense of obligation to a family, to a community, to a country, to a church maybe for us. And you can't simply claim the one and then ignore the other. And that's, I think, Socrates isn't using the language of rights, but I think that's at the heart of what he's saying. Is, I've benefited from this Periclean kind of freedom and equality, but that rests on a bed of obligation and duty. And even though this is a flawed system, I still have an obligation here to fulfill, and I can't just get rid of it. Sam, by this point, students have gone through not just the Ancient World Museum, but they've been through the Early Christianity Museum, which is one I really like. It's a really sprawling museum. It covers a lot of territory, but also features Mike Holmes, who's one of the founding fathers of CWC, one of the most famous Bethel professors. He's one of the few who has a Wikipedia page, if you haven't looked him up. And my favorite room of his is the one where you have him kind of speaking to theological debates about the formation of the canon, about the nature of Christology. And some of those we don't tend to do a lot with in the face-to-face course, and this was an early place where we thought, here's a chance for students to kind of explore. Maybe some of these really speak to them. So I'll ask you, which of those debates from the early church really speaks to you?
To me, the most interesting one is the sort of debate over the canon or the development of the canon. And it's because so many of the other debates end up being rooted in, where do we look to for truth? That's one of the big questions for CWC, right? Like what authorities do I lean on? And when we get further in the course, especially when we get to the Protestant Reformation, right, that the canon of Scripture is so central, so core, right? That is our authority. And they're not, and later Christians are going to say, I'm not as interested in sort of in your philosophical interpretation, but more what does the text say, right? Mm-hmm. But then I go back and say, well, but we look at the canon, and this is people debating and putting the canon together, and then you need to think about, it forces me to think about what is the role of God in history, right? Mm-hmm. How do we know we got it right? And where are the points where we say, well, that was clearly God was guiding the people who shaped the canon. But then we say later on, when we look at sort of theological interpretations of things, well, that's just a human's interpretation of this. Well, we're kind of playing fast and loose a little bit with that. So to me, the formation of the canon is really, really important, both what's included, what's left out, and sometimes what's left out is left out because it's deemed heretical, right? But sometimes it's left out just because it has a quality, but it doesn't reach the level of certainty they feel about it in terms of other things. And some of those texts get lost to history or sort of pushed off to the sides, right? The letter to Diognetus is kind of one of those types of things, right? Where it's this early church epistle, but it's not scriptural, but it does have real value. I mean, the book of Maccabees is like that. Mm-hmm. For the Protestants, right? They say, well, it's not in the canon of Scripture, but it's actually a really important historical text. And I think the formation of the thing which becomes our understanding of God's teachings is really fascinating.
Yeah, likewise, I'm really drawn to the Arian debate, Arius and Athanasius, that settled at the Council of Nicaea. Not even so much because I'm interested in the Christology of it. I mean, I think it's an important distinction. I think Athanasius is right, by my reading of that canon. I'm more interested, though, in the notion that this is how God chooses to work in the church. This is not a mythological God. This is not a Deus ex machina God who just steps in and settles things. He works through history, and that means he works through flawed individuals and institutions. And because I think people sometimes look at the Council of Nicaea and, well, that was just, that's Constantine. We heard this in the documentary film. He's maybe more concerned with the political unity of the empire than the theological certitude of who is Christ. And there's voting and there's debating and there's coercion that goes on. It's deeply flawed, right? Except that maybe that's how the Spirit blows through the kind of warp and woof of human society. And I think it's really important that Christians kind of own that. And it's going to be messy as a result, but that's how God chooses to work. Right. Messiah does not come into the ether; he comes into the earth. He's God with us,
right? And I feel like it's the kind of thing. And there's lots of things we'll encounter in this class that it can make you feel very uneasy about Christianity, or it can make you feel like there's something really real here, right? And to me, I look at these debates and I say to myself, even if this was human beings doing this and this and this, 2,000 years later, right? The power of the core of the gospel. We don't always live it out, but we can see it. It's there, right? Love, forgive, grace, mercy, right? The things that we see Christ teaching about, even if we can pick apart parts of the narrative as to how that's created, that the power of that message, the importance of that message is still there. And I think that's, to me, that's where I take heart instead of being sort of, this is shattering to my faith. You're like, no, that's the stuff, right? That's the real Chris, we are, by the time students read this, you will have celebrated a wonderful, you'll have celebrated a wonderful 4th of July holiday. We are, approaching 4th of July. We're about to go away on our 4th of July vacations. This is a very patriotic holiday, right? We've also been sort of reading and talking about Augustine and his relationship to the empire and thinking about the church's relationship to the empire. What do you think Augustine would say, as we think about the 4th of July, the sort of celebrations of patriotism?
Sure. I mean, I think he'd say two things. One is, that's fine, and the other is, be careful, right? I mean, it's fine in the sense that love of country is okay. To get back to this notion that we kind of live in the world, right? I mean, this is important. We do not live in the ether. We live in particular places, and we do have obligations to communities. And I think it's perfectly not just fine, but appropriate and valuable that we form emotional attachments and, maybe even to this kind of imagined community of a nation. Even if I don't meet more than a few of the 300 million Americans, I can love that community, and maybe more importantly, I can really value the ideals that it has. We're going to debate what those ideals are and how to live them out. But I think that's fine. Like, one thing he's saying is not that you need to flee away from the world, that you have nothing to do with the rest of society. He does not have that response. But I think, and maybe this is the more important one to think about on the 4th of July, is like, that's all fine as long as you know that you have a higher allegiance. And if you start to confuse them or conflate them and say, my love of God is equivalent to my love of my country, then you're getting yourself into real trouble, according to Augustine. Because even though it's good that we have as good a government as possible and as just a system as possible, it's still flawed, and it's temporary, and it's conniving and selfish, and it can do some good, but it can't do the good, and it's not eternal good.
Right, and I think I'm really drawn to his discussion of peace, right? And so thinking about the nation and saying, okay, on our best days, right, when we are leaning towards, to use Lincoln's phrase, the better angels of our nature, right? What are we seeking, and how, as a nation, and how do those things start to align with sort of God's teaching and God's kingdom, right? And it's never going to totally align, but that's where he talks about peace. He's like, right, the nation seeks peace, the government seeks peace, and God's kingdom seeks peace. Now, just because they align doesn't mean it's the same thing either, right? That the kind of peace that the nation seeks is this sort of worldly order and peace, and the kind of peace that the kingdom of God seeks or the city of God seeks is very different, right? It's sort of what the nation seeks, and more so and more so and more so, right? So I think sort of I tend to think about the 4th of July. If I want to think about sort of patriotism, it's like what do we aspire? What are the best things we aspire to? This is where I would go back to Thucydides' reading, and I think about the Pericles part and say, this is us on our best days. Yeah. Now let's try to be that as a nation, but let's also know that the nation's not going to achieve that, right? And that, like you said, we're called to something higher.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about patriotism because it's not honestly something I'm all that comfortable with. Like, I have a hard time honestly singing the Star Spangled Banner at a baseball game, and I don't like the notion of God bless America unless we're blessing all their nation as well. But Barack Obama has actually done a lot to help me kind of recapture patriotism. He gave a speech at the bridge in Selma that was this watershed moment in the civil rights movement, and he said that American patriotism is the belief that there's a more perfect union to be made. So it's not a static, we've got it, let's defend it. It's we can do this better. And just this past, for us a couple of days ago, when he was preaching the eulogy for the 9 people who died in the Charleston church, he had the sense that, maybe God is actually moving. He talked a lot about grace, and maybe God gives us the grace to see where we've fallen short and to see our blind spots. But it suggests that we're not there, but also that there is potential for pride. And that's a kind of patriotism, I guess, that I can celebrate. Still keeping in mind Augustine's warning that this earthly peace is never going to be the same piece. Okay, enough kind of abstract theoretical thinking. Let's get down to brass tacks. Students, you have a test coming up tomorrow. So, Sam, why don't we just start with a reminder of how testing works in an online environment for this course?
So, as we've said before, your tests are going to be open note, open book. So you can use any of those things. But what comes along with that is that there is a limited amount of time. Once you start taking the test, the clock starts ticking. And how much time do they have to take the test?
So they have 75 minutes, which is actually a little bit longer than we do face-to-face. You have a window from 3 to 7 Central Daylight Time. So start any time within that window, and then you'll get 75 minutes. So, I mean, as I think we talked about in the first webisode, you do have to really watch time management on this. That's a long time to sit there. But especially with the essay, you can maybe leave yourself short if you're taking too long. So, for example, one thing I'd say is we will put mastery vocab on there. We'll have, a lot of it will be kind of very short answers. We'll ask you to write about some terms. As long as you're giving us like a connections or a couple of significant, you don't have to write long paragraphs about. You just have to convince us you know who these
right.
people
And I'll say
are
that's where oftentimes students get into trouble is they start from the beginning of the test and work towards the essay, and I'll realize they've written essentially an essay length for the connection, and then they don't have time in the essays, and that's mostly just really unfortunate, right? So keep that in mind. Also, know you don't have to do these in order, right? If
you can skip around.
If you're going to feel more comfortable writing the essay first, getting that out, do that, right? So think about, and part of thinking about time management is because it's open note and open book, there's other things you can use while you're taking the test. Like if I was doing it, I would have my phone with me and I would set little timers like, okay, I'm going to work on this section. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes. So then, not to say like once 10 minutes is up, I have to move on, but that's a reminder that 10 minutes have now passed. Am I where I think I should be for this? Or do I need to make sure, so you're aware of the passage of time, right? So I think giving yourself little 10-minute warnings along the way can be really helpful. It's easy to do on your phone. It's usually just one click and you've started another 10-second clock. So I think that can be a really, really helpful thing. Do you have any advice in terms of, we've talked a lot about organizing your notes, being ready that way. Like how would you do that if you were taking this test?
I actually tend to write out study guides for myself. And this is a little different because we've given you a study guide, and I hope you can actually either print that out or maybe you can even find a way to edit the PDF. One thing to watch out for is we will do quotation matching, and that can seem like a really easy thing to do because I don't think I'm giving away any secret when I point out you can search a PDF. It's going to go a lot faster, and you'll save yourself a lot more time if you've been doing the reading to this point. If you've been organizing notes, we give you a little chart that you can use. Those should be really easy points. Quotation matching, vocab matching, probably timeline, the map. You should see those, and you shouldn't have to think a lot. So, we're a day away from the test, so maybe at this point it's too late. But moving forward, it's not the kind of thing where you can just put it off till the moment of the test, trust in your ability to search through your notes or to just search through a PDF. It's going to go a lot more smoothly if you've just been investing time in the work up to the point of the test. So maybe you see how it goes this time, but that might point towards some things to work on for next time. All right, in segment 2, we like to play games. You've got your heads on sticks, you've got your make the case, but I think our favorite game, Sam, is called Food Chain. We'll be doing this, I think, every single unit in the pre-exam sort of review the whole unit, because this is just a great way to go back through a lot of like mastery vocab, big concepts, and
it's competitive.
And it's competitive. And again, you will get to vote. We'll have a poll up on Moodle, so you don't have a discussion board post this week, but if you want to, please do go vote and go and vote for who won this food chain game. So what are the rules of food chain?
Basically, we're looking at all of the mastery terms that we learned in Unit 1 of CWC. And the question is to look at the people who are mastery terms and take your top 5 and rank them.
So
right?
In terms of significance to Christianity and or Western culture.
Yep. So how significant, how important? Because that's the big thing that makes a mastery term a mastery term. Now, we took 2 terms out, right? So we took out Jesus, because it's kind of, that would be sort of an obvious number 1, so that's not that. It's sad to say Jesus isn't that fun or makes it less fun, but it kind of does. And for the similar reason, we took out Paul the Apostle, because if you have somebody who wrote multiple books in the Bible, like that's... we're not taking them out. We're sort of saying they're red. They're already on the list.
Yeah, mentally place them on the list here, and then we're doing actually like 3 through 7.
There you go.
It's not a math show.
That's right. So I'll let you lead off.
Okay. So here's the way we'll come from this. I'll do my 5th, and then count up towards. You'll follow along. So number 5 will be Alexander the Great. Now, I guess what I want to say here is that there are different ways of thinking about significance. I'm not putting him up here necessarily because he's the 5th most admirable person from the first unit of CWC, even though that would have been the answer you would get from others at different points in history. But I want to underscore the importance of historical political shifts for the other things we're doing. I mean, we keep talking about how the early church is a Hellenistic church or inhabits a Hellenistic culture. That's not true without Alexander doing his world-conquering thing. And so it sets up so much of what happens, certainly in the early church period. So a very different direction for number 4. St. Anthony of Egypt, Anthony of the Desert. One thing that's really struck me in teaching CWC that I didn't get when I first came in is the importance of these kind of figures who don't attract really that many followers. There are not that many people in his time, in our time, who are trying to do what Anthony did, but partly because of that, he stands out, is have a very different path of discipleship, of cultural engagement or withdrawal in his case. And so I think it's a really important person to take seriously, who does then set off the monastic tradition, which to this day is a really important tradition. I've been reading a lot of conservative thinkers arguing for a Benedict option. We'll talk more about that in Unit 2, but essentially to say we can learn from the monastics in dealing with their culture. In some ways, the reason he's so significant is because of who I'll put number 3, the Roman Emperor Constantine. We already kind of hinted at this, talking about the Council of Nicaea, but Constantine is important because he reshapes Western culture in some way, but he certainly reshapes Christian cultural engagement. After Constantine, you're going to have to deal with church and state not being the latter persecuting the former. And I think we're dealing with this to this day. The fact that so many Christians are, say, troubled by the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, I don't know the early 1st, 2nd century church would care that much if a Roman court ruled something about marriage. That the fact we care so much speaks to the enduring significance of Constantine. Now, Sam, on our last episode, made the case that the Greeks are more important because they built an empire of the mind, which might be in some ways more important than the physical Roman Empire. So I'll go ahead and put Plato here, because honestly, I wish I had argued Plato's case last week, because I think he has the stronger case as a contributor to philosophical tradition. There's always the problem here of well, shouldn't you put Socrates, he was Plato's teacher, shouldn't you put both Plato and Aristotle? I'm just going to skip it and say Plato, because he can stand in for both in some senses. And I do think his ideas really are the formative ideas. He's the one who's helping Christians think about really fundamental eternal things. And then number 1 for me is St. Augustine. In some ways, Augustine helps Christians deal with that empire and with that empire in a very subtle, complicated manner, in neither to reject nor to fully absorb either of those two empires, but say, well, maybe we have something to learn from Plato, but the full gospel is not there. But we have to live in this world, right? And maybe we've got some allegiance to states like this, but we don't have primary allegiance. So, to me, Augustine is the most important as we come to the end of this first unit. Sam, what's your list?
I really like this list, so I'm going to start by commenting on your list a little bit, then I'm going to show you mine. I'm excited to see someone like St. Anthony on here. As you'll see, Anthony may not be on my list, but I think he's a really important figure. So my list starts with somebody who I think contrasts a great deal with Alexander the Great. So part of the argument for Alexander is that if we look at sort of the vast history, right, he's somebody that's important, and he's somebody that's important because what he does has such an impact on the world. He doesn't necessarily even know he's impacting the world in that way. I always talk with students about one of the significances for Alexander is that he helped set the cultural context for the New Testament world. Now, if you told Alexander that, he would have no idea what you were talking about because you would probably be speaking English, and because he doesn't know about the New Testament because he's 300 years before Christ, but you need Alexander to create that fullness of time. So he's really important.
Thanks for making my case, by the way.
Exactly. But who I wanted to pick to put on this list that you don't have is Perpetua. And Perpetua is a very different figure than Alexander in lots and lots of ways. Alexander is sort of a figure of power and influence. Perpetua is somebody who's probably the least famous person we're going to see up on this board today, right? Most Christians don't know who Perpetua is. If you ask somebody what Perpetua is, they're going to maybe say it's a font in Microsoft Word, right? That's about as far as we're going to get with that. But I think Perpetua is important precisely because she's a woman. She's responding to the Roman Empire, right? Persecution of the Roman Empire. She writes her own story. This is something that I'm sort of obsessed with, is people writing their story, people capturing their story, sharing their story, right? Putting their story down. So we know firsthand what Roman persecution looks like. We know firsthand what it looks like to be a woman living in the Roman Empire who's a new convert to Christianity. And we know that because of her, right? She provides a powerful witness. And not because she's a person of power, she's a person of influence, not even because she's the most highly educated person whose ideas echo through the ages, but her witness echoes through the ages. So I really need to have her up on this list. Number 4 on my list, also someone you don't have, Aristotle. Now, it's funny you talked about Plato in last week's game. I put Aristotle up here in part because I actually agree with a lot of what you said about Aristotle, right? That I think we can think about Plato's contributions, but Aristotle is going to be important to Christianity as we get into the Middle Ages. He's going to become an essential philosopher for Thomas Aquinas, who is the monumental mind of the Middle Ages. Aristotle is also so important to science, and we live in a world where a scientific worldview is really at its core. And although we reject a lot of Aristotle's science, his sort of the beginnings of his method, or at least his epistemology, his understanding of truth, really matches up with that scientific worldview. So I think it's important to have this tower of Greek philosophy up on this list. One more that didn't make your list, somebody that I'm a huge fan of, and I think gets short shrift in CWC and in courses like this sometimes, is someone like the poet Homer. Right? We like to talk about this Greek empire of the mind, and we instantly go to philosophy: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Homer, in writing the Odyssey and the Iliad, writes these essential texts which are going to be central to Western education, not only in ancient Greece, but also in ancient Rome. And going forward throughout the Middle Ages, the Homeric texts are going to be important. Really, going into the 20th century, these are going to be essential, important texts, not just because they're great stories, but because they teach us about sort of what one potential set of human values, one answers to sort of questions about what does it mean to be a person, especially what does it mean to be a man, and we may debate those answers. But I would say at their core, there's some really deep values. I mean, I really encourage you, after this course is over, if you're looking for something to read before the fall semester begins, sit down and read Homer's Iliad. I think it might be one of the great pieces of literature ever, right? And at its core is this war story, but beyond that, it's a story of, in the midst of the most brutal war, we find grace and mercy, right? And I think that's a really powerful thing. And to me, Homer is just this essential figure. Next on my list here is where we're starting to get a little bit of overlap with you. I put Augustine for a lot of the same reasons that you do. I mean, he's this hinge figure, right? We're talking about Augustine looking back. I mean, he's sort of at the end of the ancient world, and he's looking backwards, and he's dealing with Constantine and Plato, and really this entire Greco-Roman world. But at the same time that he's looking backwards, he's also somebody who has the ability to look forward, right? He's going to shape the Middle Ages. So where we're going to go in Unit 2, so much of that world, so much of that church is going to be shaped by Augustine. Then my number one person on the board is the philosopher Plato, right? For a lot of the reasons Chris talked about, I think he's just central to Western philosophy and central to sort of the undergirdings to some of the philosophical context for understanding Christianity, and the way that people like Paul, who's sort of up here on this list, is going to use Plato a lot in his writing.
Yeah, I really like Sam's list as well. I especially like that he made room for someone from a literary tradition, not just from philosophy or politics. Perpetua, I kind of warred with myself about doing Perpetua or Anthony. If nothing else, she stands in for half the population whose voice is basically silent because of the nature of political and social and legal economic structures. What really strikes me here is if you look at the Christians on the list, so Augustine, Constantine, Anthony, and Perpetua, only one of them is a European, right? Constantine is the only European on here. This is an African Christian lit, and actually all basically from around Carthage, kind of Tunisia. Actually, Anthony is Egyptian, right? But so this is an African church. And one place we're headed as we move into the Middle Ages is, I guarantee you, when we do food chain at the end of Unit 2, we will not have a lot of African Christians. We won't have any African
Well, another thing I'll point out about the Christians on this list, not only are they Africans, they are, in lots and lots of ways, most of them are theologians, right? Yeah. Anthony's not particularly a theologian. Constantine's not a theologian. Perpetua's not a theologian. Augustine's a theologian, yes, right? Okay. So, and I point that out because I think sort of the context of thinking about Bethel growing out of a Protestant Reformation tradition, right? There's a huge bent towards theology within the Protestant church, and what we need to realize is that these are Christian figures, important Christian figures, whose central ideas aren't centered around theology, but they're centered around practice. How do you live your life? How do you shape the world around you? How do you respond to the world around you? How do you embrace discipleship in your life and discipleship as suffering? I think that's a really interesting thing we can look back on the early church on. There's lots of theologians, but it's tied in some different ways, and it's not sort of this theology isn't this pure thing where it becomes almost math problems and trying to figure out the logic of that.
Well, I think that really fits with CWC. This is not Christian theology. That's a separate class at Bethel. We certainly want to take theological questions seriously, but we're more interested in how Christians live in tension, in agreement, in resistance to with culture. And so this is a good list for that. Okay.
So who wins? That's the big question, right?
Well, I really liked your last argument, so you might have just pulled away at the
Except
end.
for you have more of those people.
Well, we'll see. So the students, you get to decide. We're not going to figure this out. So go to Moodle, vote for the winner of our first installment of Food Chain as our tournament continues here on the Webisodes. Okay, it's happy time. Happy birthday to my mom, Elaine Gehrz.
This is getting very personal with these happies, I feel
I'm all about self-revelation. Age not revealed. Sam, what's your mother's idea of the perfect birthday?
Oh, I'm going to make fun of my mom here, but she's never going to watch this. And in fact, I'm going to make fun of her, but to her, she's just going to be like, yes, that was the correct answer. So it's probably, you start the day sitting at home watching any of a number of Whoopi Goldberg movies from the 80s. That's 80s, or actually 90s would be better.
Sister Act?
Yeah. Sister Act would be perfect. And then I'm trying to think what we would have for. I'm not sure what we'd have for dinner, but something not blue. She doesn't like blue foods at all, so that would be to make a bad. I don't know. But then let's see, the best thing you could do for the evening is to go to see Anne Murray in concert or Bette Midler in concert, which she either just did or is going to soon. Yes, or if the two of them did a concert together, her head would explode. So yeah, I think that would be.
So basically, it sounds like it's not a whole lot different than other days, with the possible exception of the Anne Murray, Bette Midler collaborative concert.
Together at Last concert. Right. Happy anniversary, Chris. Sliced bread sold for the first time on this day in 1928 in Chillicothe, Missouri. Chris, what's the best thing since this day in 1928?
Now, first of all, I should admit that to do the research for this, I simply go on Wikipedia. But I have confirmed this with some other websites that I'm sure are well researched.
See, here's the thing that blows me away with this is
how did no one think of sliced bread until 1928?
And I sort of assumed that the phrase "the best thing since sliced bread" predates 1928. Don't you feel like that's a late 19th century phrase?
Well, that's why I'm a little dubious about this. Now, that all being said, what's the best thing since sliced bread? I really struggled with this. This is the hardest question I've had to answer. And I don't even have a good, part of me wants to be all stupid and say unsliced bread. And be all, it sounds like the good hipster answer.
That's actually not bad, yeah.
I just want to rip that bread off. Smell into it. It's actually true. Sliced bread gets stale more quickly, so I'm not sure it's really such a great thing. But to me, I think I was working on this on my computer, and the best thing since sliced bread to me is Google Apps, and I'm starting to realize how much this is reshaping my workflow, and I've noticed students collaborating a lot more with each other, and this is not a good answer.
What a nerd.
Okay, what's the best thing since
I don't know.
sliced bread?
The question is for you, Chris.
Okay. Apparently an Anne Murray, Bette Midler.
That's right. My mom, that would be it, yes.
Okay, Sam. Happy trails to Independence Day. Sam, another 4th of July. At this point is in the books. Of all the holidays remaining in 2015, which one are you most looking forward to?
I'm going to give an interesting answer here. Maybe it's not interesting. I don't know. But I'm going to get a little soapbox a little bit about holidays.
Wow.
I'm somebody for whom holidays are kind of stressful. Not stressful. I like the food preparation, and Chris and I both like to cook. I like cooking. That's not the issue. I don't like holidays that have a lot of sort of Norman Rockwell expectations from people. So Thanksgiving's off the table. See, what I like is cookout holidays, where the only way you celebrate is to basically have people over and cook out, or just have a meal. Those are my favorite holidays, right? There's no gifts, things like that. So Thanksgiving's close to that, except for Norman Rockwell ruined that, right? That we have this sort of image of, we don't want to. People have too many expectations. Christmas off the table.
So if you had painted an image of Labor Day with your smoker, it would have.
You're getting there. Okay. See, Labor Day is the answer. Now, the bad thing about Labor Day is that the next day is school, right? Now, we actually start before Labor Day this year, but that kind of ruins Labor Day a little bit, which is why I'm not a hyper-patriotic person, but 4th of July might be the best holiday because it's in the middle of summer, and as a teacher, that's great. It's only a cookout holiday. Love it. We need more cookout holidays.
Okay, but the question of all the holidays remaining in 2000.
Labor Day. Oh, Labor Day.
Oh, Labor Day.
Yeah. Because it is the one cookout holiday we have left.
I wouldn't normally say this, but this year I'm going to say New Year's Eve simply because I will wake up the next day and I will not have J-term to prepare for because I get J-term off this year, which I love J-term, but it's a ton of work.
I get J-term off too.
So no discussion post tomorrow because you've got a test tomorrow. But you can certainly discuss maybe the 4th of July question we asked about Augustine. If you want to weigh in, you can email, and we'll talk about that on our next webisode. But please do go to Moodle, vote for the winner of Food Chain. And send us any other email. What's your favorite holiday you're looking forward to? What's your ideal perfect birthday? We'd love to work your opinion into this.
Let us know how the test went after you took it.
There you go. Or don't, but either way. All right, so do well on the test. Don't worry too much about it. You got a day off after it, so you have some time to recuperate, and then we'll jump into the second unit. It'll be the Middle Ages, Reformation before you know it, and then you're on to the second test. And time does kind of compress in CWC. The first one, we give you a lot of time before the test, and then it kind of scales down. I don't know what I'm doing here exactly.
Compressing, that works.
Okay.
Converging.
All right, another good webisode. Say goodnight, Stacy.
Good night.